Hi, this is Neil Howman from the Flint, and this is the next episode of our podcast series. And on this episode, I'd very much like to welcome Amy DeLouise. Hi, Amy.
Hey, Neil. Nice to see you again.
Well, it's very nice to see you, and looking so well, because I know you've been
Thank you.
you've been a little bit under the weather, but it's very nice to see you looking so well. Amy, if you guys out there haven't heard of Amy, Amy is Chief Creative Officer of DeLouise Enterprises and founder of GalsNGear, more on which later. But Amy, I was just taking a glance through all the other things you've got up to over recent years, and we could probably have 3 or 4 podcasts just talking about your resume, really. But can I just roll off a few of these, and we can?
Sure.
Yeah, no objection. Okay, video content strategist, video producer and director, having directed more than 400 short videos and received dozens of industry awards, entrepreneur, obviously, keynote speaker, storyteller and author, consultant, trainer, workshop leader, founder of GalsNGear, more on that later, and indeed an award winner as well, industry award winner. Amy is a recipient of Women of Vision Award from Women in Film and Video. That's the Washington, DC chapter. And she recently received the IABM Media and Entertainment Mentoring Award for services to the industry. So, Amy, what I want to know is what you're going to do when you really get going.
I don't know, Neil. You know me. I love to have lots of different plates spinning at the same time.
I'm kind of dizzy reading through that. So that's quite impressive. We'll dig into a few more of those later. I would hope, but can I take you back a while, Amy? I believe you grew up around Maryland, Washington, DC area?
Basically, I'm originally from New York, so that's still in my blood, but I moved as a kid to Maryland and then came back after college.
Yeah, so you went to college, you read English at Yale, and I was just wondering, by the time you got there, had you any idea about my daughter's doing an English degree at the moment and has no idea what she's going to do after university. I wondered if during school and then college you had ideas what you'd want to do?
Well, when I was at Yale, they did not have a film production department. They only had a film theory department. Right. But I was lucky enough to take a course from Annette Insdorf, who's, of course, one of the most famous film critics and writers and authors on the industry. So I got a great grounding from that course. And we also had something at the time called film societies. Nobody has that anymore because everybody can stream everything, into their room and onto their device. But at the time, we had probably 10 or 12 different film societies. And just about every night, if you had the availability, you could go and see you could see cutting edge documentaries. You could see classics like Casablanca on the big screen. You could see, we saw all of the Prisoner series, that weird television series. We saw all of the, James Bond movies from beginning to end. I mean, so it was really a film education without my realizing that was what was happening. So that actually came in handy much later on when I decided to dive into the industry, but it was definitely not my intention when I started as a student.
But I suppose the film societies also then gave you an opportunity, not just to watch the films, but talk about them. And how did they do that?
Exactly. And it was just, it just became a vocabulary, really. You just learned the vocabulary of filmmaking without realizing it. And I think also seeing them on the big screen made a big impact. When you see Kubrick on the big screen, it just has a very different effect on you than watching it on your phone or something, So I think just we didn't realize what we were getting as an extra add-on to our education.
So when you graduated, what was your first job? Was it
Right.
Was it connected?
Well, actually, I worked as a temp first for a lot of law firms,
Oh, right.
which actually turned out to be a very handy thing for a future entrepreneur. I learned a lot about contract law. But I also, I was temping actually, crazily enough, for a shipping company, basically shipping rice and other things around the world. And I was putting push pins in a map. And I thought, this is definitely not the job I want to have. And I was reading a broadcast magazine, and it talked about some companies starting up in the industry in my area. And I just cold called a production company and said, can I come and work for you as a production assistant? And they said yes.
Right.
So I got my start really doing a little bit of everything. I was the first person to unwrap the Excel package that came to the office, and nobody knew how to do spreadsheets except for me. So I was doing budgeting. I was scrubbing through footage and logging footage. I was learning how to do, basic edit decision lists and, teeing things up for producers. And then we were working on a television special, and the writer got pneumonia, and they said, well, you were an English major at Yale, you write it. So that was my big break. I got a screen credit for writing a television special on ABC, and sort of the rest is history.
And when are we? I don't mean to be indiscreet here, Amy, but when are we talking? When
We're
was?
talking about a long time ago, Neil.
A long time ago.
Ask women about that. In another century.
That is the correct answer. So this podcast can continue now because you've got the right answer there.
It was a long time.
I'm very interested to know. Obviously, they wouldn't have just handed any production assistant who hadn't shown a real enthusiasm for doing bits and bobs of things, even if they'd had an English degree, to go and write a series.
Right. It was very helpful that I had already sort of seen what all the pieces were to the segments. Mm-hmm. And Barbara Walters was narrating and hosting. And of course, her team didn't know how young I was. I was just talking to them on the phone about how I wanted them to direct certain passages and,
that's brilliant.
Certain camera angles. It was like a remote shoot. It really was like an early version of a remote shoot, because she was up on the set of 2020 in New York. And I remember her commenting and saying, this is an incredibly well-written script. So I really appreciated that. And that kind of opened up a door to me. And then one of the location managers who worked for that company, after I left that company, she hired me on Forrest Gump and a bunch of other movies, Nixon and Primary Colors and things. And I got sort of my foot in the door of the feature film side of the business. Wonderful. And that was really my film school, because I was on set with obviously hundreds of people in different departments, doing all kinds of things. So I went from a very small production company where everybody did multiple jobs to big teams where everybody just had one job. And on Gump, I worked in the art department.
Yeah, I was going to say, what job? Because obviously you'd really prove yourself on the writing side of things, but you were then offered other things. But you were
first she hired me in locations, and I worked what I call the permits and porta potties portion of my career. But very good. It's always good to know how to do logistics. I learned how to order a scissor lift, and how you go into a location and get all your permits lined up and all of that stuff. But for Gump, I worked in the art department, and so I was researching all these storylines. They were like, go find scenes of ping pong tournaments in China, and go find out what it looked like for these Vietnam protests in Washington, and what kinds of cameras were on top of the camera trucks. Were there film cameras? Were there video cameras? Answer, there were both at that time.
Oh, really? Yes.
So I was researching, visuals. The sign department would recreate signs that I researched, and recreate what signs people were holding up at the protests. I mean, all that stuff was created from stuff that I and other art department researchers found out. So it was a great education in the workflow of production. And of course, it really got me started in the digital production world, because really unbeknownst to me at the time, that was the very beginning. That was one of the very first uses. Bob Zemeckis was using those digital cameras to recreate those big scenes. And so I was witnessing that exact thing with Industrial Light and Magic, and I was sending them shots of Richard Nixon shaking hands with people that were the right height for Tom Hanks and all that stuff.
So you were kind of learning by default the new skills of the digital world required. Was that just by watching? You were getting your hands sort of dirty with
No,
that?
absolutely. I mean, I was in the thick of it.
Just
ILM
doing
would
it
call and say, we can't, you sent us a great shot, but it's got too complicated a background. We can't replicate that. Can you find a background that's more simple? So I was learning about, green screen and digital compositing without, going to
pretty
school for
early
it.
on.
Obviously, it was learning from the masters. So it was a great education. But I also learned that I really loved the real people stories that I was actually researching,
Sure.
as opposed to the fictional side of the storytelling. So I really pivoted into sort of the documentary side of things and became an associate producer and, working with other producers and writing short form documentary, and then eventually launching my own production company.
Your resume is beginning to make so much sense that you can answer so many things.
Oh, I'm glad it makes sense to you, because it's zigging and zagging.
It's such a comprehensive education. What was the we're touching on more the GalsNGear and women in the industry there. What was the landscape like when you first joined, or on some of the major productions you worked?
Right. Well, I mean, certainly women were primarily in the location department, the makeup and hair department, and the art department. Bob Zemeckis, I think, was groundbreaking in that Wendy Feinerman was one of his producers. She rolled up every day in her extremely cool black, motorcycle jacket.
Nice.
So we all took notice, like, oh, that's what a badass producer woman could look like.
That's right.
But that was unusual at the time. And I became a member of Women in Film and Video. And I remember, going to one of their events and thinking, wow, where have all these women been? Like, because they haven't been on any of the sets that I've been on. So, that was part of the landscape. And there was probably a reason I became an entrepreneur, was it became very clear that if eventually you wanted to call the shots, you were probably going to have to do it in your own shop.
Yourself, yeah. Just for the benefit of our either viewers or listeners, maybe both, who knows? Could you tell us a bit more about Women in Film and Video? Its origin.
Sure. Well, that's an American organization, but that's where it started. But it spread, and they have chapters all over the world. They're not really chapters; they're independent organizations. But there are many, many organizations in other countries all around the world, from India, Europe, Canada, etc. I became a board member. I became a president. Got to meet women from all around the world who were doing various aspects of film production. So it was really instrumental in my development. And also I had a lot of mentors in that organization that really helped me with my career, and still do to this day. I still have people that I touch base with who knew me way back when.
But the origins of the organization itself, Women in Film and Video, was that fully up and running when you'd entered the industry?
Yeah, I mean, it was fairly new. The LA and New York chapters were, I think, the first chapters, and the Washington, D.C. chapter was like the third chapter to form in about the early 70s. So it was before my time, but it certainly was, they were all established by the time I showed up on the scene. And they were doing things like hosting film festivals of women-directed movies, things that I, of course, had never seen before.
Yeah, of course.
So they were doing a lot of really good work, and then, expanded into sort of technical education as well.
But you, moving on a bit, although you'd been exposed to all these different aspects of the industry, you came to the conclusion that to really get things done, made, do what you wanted, you had to kind of dictate that yourself. Is that the origin of where DeLouise Enterprises came from, or?
Yes, I mean, I had a couple of different iterations of my company, but yes. So I launched, sort of hung out my shield, I started out really as sort of offering script writing and associate producing services, and then expanded that to producing and post-production,
Was
and
that
eventually we had a
predominantly?
studio with equipment and, lots of edit bays and all that other groovy stuff.
Right.
And then we went virtual way before COVID, because I really saw that the web was changing, how communications was happening. And I didn't want to be backed into a corner that I had to be selling just video production services,
Right.
when it seemed like digital content was taking a lot of different forms. So I dispensed with the studio, dispensed with all the gear, and decided to create an entirely virtual office.
Excellent. And was this predominantly, you could obviously turn your hand to all sorts of productions, but was this predominantly documentaries or?
I would say docu-style, nonfiction, short form, corporate video, government, nonprofit associations, agencies.
Yeah.
That was the bread and butter of our work. And I really personally always liked real people focused stories. That's always been my passion. And I've written a book about that. And it's actually going to be one of my boot camps that I'm teaching at NAB. So,
Right.
But we've done everything. We've done things that are animated, things that rely on After Effects or cell animation. I mean, we've done the gamut.
Yeah, and from the early days of going it alone, were you conscious of wanting to give as many opportunities to women in the industry as possible? Was that quite? I'm trying to sort of get to the genesis of where GalsNGear. I know it formed in 2016, but I presume various experiences you'd had both in your, entrepreneurial life and experience up to them was kind of slowly but surely informing.
Right. Well, I mean, I had always had a lot of women on my staff, but I think it was also, I tried to work with as many women cinematographers as I could, sound designers, editors, and sometimes it was frustrating that you couldn't necessarily find women to work with in those areas, and certainly not people of color. It was very hard, which is crazy being in the Washington, D.C. area, which is such a large community of people of color. So that certainly changed over the years, but I think that was certainly a frustration, I guess, sort of a nagging frustration over the years. But I've been lucky to partner with a lot of fantastic women and men in all of our productions.
So moving forward to 2016, where you launched GalsNGear, that it sounded like it was a sort of cumulative thing building within you, that you were observing some frustrations, that women's opportunities, women of color, the whole diversity and inclusivity of the industry was just not being.
Well, I think when you work in documentary or docu-style productions, these are very small productions. Everybody's doing everything.
Yeah.
It's a very different ethos than sort of the industry writ large. And I think when I started becoming a speaker at industry events like NAB Show and IBC and other industry events, and I would go to these things and look around and I'd say, where are the women? I mean, it's crazy. How can and where are the people of color? I mean, it just seemed really weird to me because that was not the world I was working in.
Right.
And so I think in 2016, I had been on a panel with a number of fantastic women talking about women in post-production specifically. Right. And it was after that panel, which was packed, by the way, with men and women. In fact, they had to bring in more chairs because there were so many people lined up to come to this session. And I just thought, there's something missing here in terms of the content that's available, the people that are being reached, the community, and a sense of welcoming to a broader community. And so that's when I decided to found GalsNGear. I came up with the hashtag while I was by myself in the ladies' room at NAB Show. And I put it up on Twitter and said, meet me at this restaurant if anybody's out there. And a bunch of women and men showed up and said, how can we help?
Fantastic. I'm intrigued about some of the conversations you might have had with various people in the industry just prior to that. Was it the prevailing thing about it's just the way it is, Amy? Were you getting a lot of that? I don't
even think it was that so much. I think there were a couple there are a couple of strands. I think there was a lot of frustration on the part of women with a lot of expertise that they were not being invited to speak about their expertise. They were only being invited to speak about being women.
Yeah.
You know, and there's a famous quote by Nadia Boulanger, who's a famous conductor who happened to be a woman in the 1920s, and she was interviewed by the New York Times, and they asked, of course, the question, what is it like to be a woman conductor? And she said, well, I've been one for more than 50 years, so I've gotten over my shock. And so I think that's how a lot of women in the industry feel. Like, we are happy to talk about our expertise. We're happy to talk about technical issues, workflow issues, you know, industry challenges, et cetera. But we're super tired of being asked about what is it like to be a woman in whatever. And so that's definitely one of our focuses at GalsNGear. We have basically a speakers bureau that we started. And for anybody who's putting on a technical conference, we can find you an expert on any possible subject who just happens to be a woman. And if you want to talk about work-life balance, just be sure you're asking the guys the same question.
Yeah. Very good. And you've, you know, I'm interested to know how quickly you formulated the kind of the mission statement. You came up with this great term, tequity. How did that just, was that the ladies' bathroom in NAB as well?
No, that took a while to formulate. And I was actually being interviewed at Infocom, and I was thinking, I'm talking to an audience of engineers, so I should come up with an equation. And so that's where I came up with tequity equals visibility plus access plus training multiplied by a community to support you. And that's really become our mantra. So we've evolved that over time. As I said, initially it was almost just like a speakers bureau, and then we added networking events, and then we added educational events, and then we added our leadership conference because we realized that there were a lot of women dropping out of the leadership pipeline who were not getting the support they needed in some key areas. And we added a student program, and you know, so we've added different pieces over time, and then we added the Tequity Hub more recently, so that we have a virtual community that comes together every month on a series of career and technical topics. So we're constantly evolving based on what our community is telling us they need and want.
So I'm very interested in the pipeline you mentioned. It's helping women in the industry sort of get to the next level or the next place they want to be. You're helping to facilitate that more. Maybe you could just expand on that a little bit for our.
Well, we're about women empowering themselves. We're not going to come and tell women what jobs they should or shouldn't do. So on the Tequity Hub, we have a lot of upskilling tools. So if let's say you're applying for a job and you're going to be managing, you know, a cloud workflow, then we've got cloud workflow tools so that you can see what's the latest and greatest. You know, maybe you're interested in live production, and so there's live production tools on there. So anything that people are interested in personally upskilling, we have that. And then our leadership development series is really very specifically focused on 4 key areas that we see that women and leaders generally need. One is how to lead teams and sort of leaning into your personal leadership style and how that affects how you put together your teams and you lead your teams. One is building your professional brand, both for yourself personally and within a bigger brand. Let's say you're in a bigger company. How do you kind of manage your personal brand inside another brand? One is financial literacy, because maybe you came in to the industry and through one door, and now you're presenting budgets and you're doing all kinds of financial management. And so that might not be a piece of what you had as your training. And the final piece is negotiation skills, which everybody can use in any aspect of their career, whether it's negotiating salary increases, whether it's negotiating with your own team, with vendors, etc. So those are the 4 pillars of our leadership training. And we offer at least one component live every year. And then we have components that we do virtually, and we can also bring them into companies if they're interested in having our faculty, so to speak, come in and help them build an internal leadership training tool.
And your next Tequity Tuesday event is on March 19th. Is that? And actually, that was the prompter really for the Flint to get in touch, because I know that sustainability is one of those topics that you're going to be covering on the next Tequity.
Absolutely. And, I think that Tequity is really part of sustainability.
Absolutely.
Sustainability is not just, using fewer plastic bottles when you're on a production or whatever. And it's not just about cloud workflows and on-prem and how many people are traveling in airplanes. That's definitely a piece of it. But another piece is being sure that we're a sustainable industry. And if we're not bringing all the people that could possibly be the talents in our industry to bear on all of the technical problems we have and all the workflow challenges we have and all of the evolving AI tools that we have, et cetera, then we're missing out on being a more sustainable industry.
Oh, I think that's very, very close to the Flint's heart as well. It is about formulating the industry we want to work in the future, And for NAB, GalsNGear at NAB first, I know that you've got some events lined up there.
We have a ton of events lined up.
Yes, you're going to be busy.
We do. And you can find them all on GalsNGear.tv.
Yeah, we'll put a link
on our website, and they're also all over the NAB show website. So we have on Sunday, we have a technical panel with a spotlight on virtual production. Right. And that's going to be a fantastic conversation with experts from a variety of companies. And then that will roll into a happy hour on the show floor. This is all in West Hall.
Very good.
So we're very excited about that.
Yeah.
Thanks to our sponsors, AWS, Dell, and NVIDIA, with partners SVG. And then on Monday night, we have our famous offsite networking party. We have an RSVP link that you need to get for that, because we've got to have RSVPs for that, or we end up getting oversold. So that will be happening, and that's always well attended. And then Tuesday morning is our leadership summit. So this year we'll be focusing on the building your professional brand component. We have Samira Bakhtiar, the general manager of AWS, will be our keynote speaker. We have several different panels. I will be teaching a deep dive workshop on tools to develop your brand. And then we will roll into a joint lunch with SVGW with some of the leading people in the sports and innovations in audience engagement side of the world. So it's going to be a very dynamic half-day program on Tuesday.
Yeah. And that is all GalsNGear focused, because you've probably got other things going on with DeLouise Enterprises.
Yes, well, I'm a speaker at FMC's Post-Production World. Oh, yeah. So I'll be teaching a variety of workshops. You can look me up on the NAB Show website. One of my favorites being, as I mentioned, my Real People on Camera boot camp. So I'll be diving into how to get the best out of interviews with people on camera, camera positions and lighting setups and audio tricks and tools, and just great storytelling with real people. Well, so I'll be teaching that and several other workshops, including one about developing your freelance brand and how to sort of navigate the gig economy.
I'm going to come along to that. I'm going to come along to that one.
Yeah, that's a popular one.
Yeah.
So I'll be running around quite a bit. I'll be teaching. I think those are all in South Hall, and then in South Hall we also will be partnering with Chiron. We have a student team with an entire team of GalsNGear live show professionals.
Oh, that's great.
We'll be mentoring the students. They're coming from ASU, the Cronkite School of Journalism. And we'll be producing 3 hours of live content from the show floor with the student team and a team of GalsNGear volunteer mentors. So that'll all be happening at the Chiron booth. So there's a lot going on.
Wow. Again, a bit like reading through your resume. I'm a bit exhausted by that. And I'm sure you'll that sounds like a full program to me, Amy. I've got one final question. Where are we really at? We notice in our conversations, and I couldn't agree more, that sustainability is not just about getting your carbon down and your flights and your energy consumption. It's the whole piece. But we notice, without mentioning any names, that there are people who kind of pay lip service or tick box to certain things and go, well, yes, this is a very serious issue. And because they've sort of, voiced it, that's almost enough. So I'm just concerned that there's quite a lot of backslapping out there, especially amongst probably white middle-aged men like me going, oh yes, more opportunities for everyone, more inclusivity, more diversity. But where would you say we are? And the rate of progress, should we say?
Well, I think it varies a lot by company, and it really depends on how much they've invested in, as you say, putting their money where their mouth is. I think, having a chief diversity officer is really not enough. It's a great start, but to me, it's really has to percolate through every department. So who's making your presentations on the trade show floor? Do you have a diverse team making presentations? Do you have a diverse team speaking? So when somebody gets invited to speak, I'm often saying, well, I'm not really the best person for that. Let me offer you somebody else. And even coaching up someone who's a bit younger and a bit greener and giving them some skills to navigate networking and speaking on stage and all those kinds of things. So I think some of it is making sure that companies are investing the time in that. And also, I think a big focus has got to be retention. And we did a lot of work on this at SVG Summit, where we had a workshop where we kind of drilled with community, folks from across the industry verticals on how we could improve retention, because it's one thing to hire diverse people, it's another thing to retain them. And so you really have to invest time in culture change and making sure that people feel welcome. And, one person mentioned, for example, that they have a kit that they give all their new employees and for coming to this particular office where their headquarters is, and it's, how to find favorite restaurants and how to find a barbershop and a hair salon. Are you including hair salons and barbershops that cut Black hair? Are you making sure that restaurants reflect diverse interests in food? There's just little things that you can do to make sure that people feel welcome. And I think that's been our big focus at GalsNGear is belonging. That DEI is not enough without the B, without a sense of belonging. And so that's why we want to be so visible at trade shows, because we want women to feel like they belong and that they're welcome there and that they are participants who have a value and something to add, whether that's at the booth or on the stage or at a networking event.
Thank you, Amy. I think that was brilliantly put. Thank you for sharing those thoughts. And if we can just remind people again where to find you, GalsNGear.tv.
Right, GalsNGear.tv.
Yeah, I'm glad you did that.
Lots of links to various productions and things we're working on and programs at NAB Show and anything coming up after that as well. So, and we love to see people on the Tequity Hub every month. We have a lot of great programs. You mentioned the one coming up on sustainability, and we have monthly programs through the end of the year. So there's a lot of content on the Tequity Hub, and we love to see people there every month.
Well, we will put all those links up when this goes out, but I'd just like to thank you so much for giving over your time. I don't know where you found the time, quite frankly, hearing about your schedule for NAB and all the things that you're doing must be incredibly busy. But thank you again, Amy, and I'll see you at NAB. Looking forward.
I will definitely see you there. We'll raise a glass, and I appreciate the time on the show.
Well, thanks so much.